Narriman Taliep, founder of WeDo Tomorrow. So I went to go Google what energy was, because I thought that was a pretty different question. And I got the traditional, I'm going to say traditional narration of it takes you from point A to B. But I mean, applying my mind, energy is really, for me, it is the heart of any economy. If you really think about it, and energy in terms of how it impacts the value chain, it is the heart of in everything that we do. And people don't realize it. I mean, we need energy for everything, and the demand is growing every single day. So as an example, if you just look at the motor car industry, energy is required just to make a motor vehicle, whether it's the individual parts, whether it's the actual engine, and then making the motor vehicle drive in itself is energy itself. So when I speak about the value chain of energy, it's actually much bigger than what we would perceive it to be. And for me personally, I mean, on reflection, for me, energy is really the heart of an economy. And I think in South Africa in particular, we felt it with load shedding. We understood the impact of how business does not trade if you do not have light, or you don't have light in the home. What that means, not only psychologically on people, but also from a welfare perspective, as well as an economic perspective. So energy for me, it is the heart of the economy, and it's the make or break in terms of how big it gets and what we're going to do moving forward. So future of energy, there's lots of trends, but I am going to just start maybe giving a few stats around where we're at. The reality is this, the energy, I'm going to call it market, will continuously grow. I think digital obviously has fast-tracked that. People don't realize that things like data centers and all of those things need energy in order to be sustained and to continue. So the demand around energy is constantly going to grow. And the reality, in terms of where we live on this beautiful earth, there's only so much resources. So we'll always have limited resources, and that's just the reality in which we stay and where we live. I mean, if I look at the stats, in particular around South Africa, people don't realize, I mean, we did stats now for the presentation, it is that just the electricity tariff, the cost of electricity, increased by something like 750% since the beginning of load shedding. Another stat is, if you look at 2022, which is last year, half of the year we had load shedding, yet the tariff was unchanged. And people don't realize that stat and the actual impact, not only on corporates and business, but on personal people in their own personal capacity and affordability to the pocket. So the world that we live in is that we know that energy is going to grow, the demand is going to grow, and at the same time, we've only got limited resources. So it is what it is. And so if we look at energy, it's saying, how do we deal with this factor? How do we look at our demand? How do we make it more cost efficient for us? How do we afford it? But at the same time, when we produce or manage this electricity, how do we bring renewable energy into the equation? Because the carbon footprint and the survival for the next generation and the grandchildren and the generations of the future, how do we make this world that they live in a sustainable world? So for me, it's a much bigger picture. It's what we refer to as the energy trilemma. And it's really saying, how do you get energy security? Once you've got that energy security, how do you balance it, that it's responsible, so you don't release those carbon emissions, or you at least minimize it to the best of your ability? And at the same time, the last element is, how do you afford it? Because that's the barrier. It's how do you afford that infrastructure that is not there, it's non-existent, and how do you create that become a new norm? And at the same time, the cost of actually maintaining that system afterwards. So it's a very delicate equation that we're dealing with, but it is, I'm going to say, a challenge that not only South Africa deals with, the entire globe deals with it. It's also, for me personally, just from an energy perspective, it's one of the most understated risks. People in South Africa just think about load shedding. They think about the next 2 years ahead. They don't think a little bit further. If you look at the globe, and Europe after the Ukraine war came to feel what we're also feeling at the moment, is that lack of energy, that accessibility to energy, and how they have to rethink how they get their supply in order to meet their demand. So that shift in terms of the focus and where it's going to go to, I think it's an important shift. And I think that there's a lot of behavior change that's going to go with it as well, which is going to be a big thing. But for me, the future of energy, the trends that we're picking up, I'm going to call it the three It's the 3 Ds. It's decarbonization, it's decentralization, and it is digital. So when we look at decarbonization, it's basically understanding the trend of moving fossil fuels to renewable energy, where there's a lot of options. I'll dive a little bit into that. And then at the same time, we've got the decentralization, where there would be, in many countries, inclusive of South Africa, where you'd only have one supplier of energy. And what we're seeing is energy is becoming micro-grids, feeding into a bigger grid. So it's starting to decentralize as a principle. And it's, if you think about your home, they encourage through legislation to get solar panels on your home. You can produce energy and you can pump that energy into the grid. So the trend around decentralization is that you will find a lot of people providing energy into the grid, be it through renewable energy, being it from households or corporates. That grid becomes wider, which is a good thing, because now the business model becomes much more sustainable and affordable, and at the same time targets become a little bit easier to reach because you've got more players that is part of this game. So decentralization is a big theme. So on the digital front, it's really about how do we use digital technology to our advantage, and how digital will assist is really to say, how do we put, as an example, software, how do we use AI to predict when the peaks are coming through? Because when you've got peak energy utilization, you've got high tariff pulling through. So through doing both, you're going to manage your energy usage, but also manage the cost of energy, which is just as important. And then for me, to the first D, which is really the decarbonization, is the move from fossil to renewable energy. And if you look at the renewable energy, I mean, there's a host of a whole lot of things, and I'm sure moving forward, more to come. Solar started in the 1970s, but really peaked during 2015 going forward. Right? So it took quite some time. It's becoming a very affordable model because more people are tying into it, and it's more accessible. As you know, recently South African government is just now starting to incentivize it, and has brought it into legislation and made it also legitimate, which is quite important. Right? Then you've got wind power, which is phenomenal, but it's based on location and where you're at. Location is key. And through that wind power, it's still at its early stages, but it's starting, the business model is becoming affordable. And you will see trends for me where people are adopting this and finding newer ways to generate that wind power. There are talks about doing wind power, along the oceans because of the environment. Then obviously the challenge is, how do you get that wind power back to the grid, etc. So it comes with its challenges, but it's options that you can look at. And then you would have obviously heard about geothermal, hydropower, which comes from the dams, the energy that water generates. And the most recent one that was in the news is hydrogen power. So it was quite interesting when I attended an event for properties, is that the South African government has signed up an agreement with Germany in terms of investing capital in a hydrogen farm around the KwaZulu-Natal area, which means Germany, speaking to the Ukraine pressure that they're experiencing, they are looking for alternative sources. But what does that mean for Africa? And what does it mean for South Africa? Another source of income. It means an opportunity to grow and to become more sustainable. So as much as there's challenges in terms of the trends, there's also a lot of opportunities. For me, also around the future of energy is what can we do? I think as stakeholders, we need to start changing our behavior. I think a big part of looking at energy is managing our demand. And I think load shedding is actually a typical example where you're forced to do things differently because there is only so much energy you can use and put on the system. The second reality for me is, as much as we want to be away from fossil fuels, I don't think it's realistic because at the moment fossil fuels represent 80% of production globally. You'd want to reduce that dramatically, but I don't think there'll ever be a point in time that you can eliminate it. So it's about how do you in the future target more renewable energy feeding into the global grid and becoming a greater percentage of contribution compared to fossil, and then use fossil more efficiently and effectively, which is being actively worked on, and at the same time, whatever's left over from the carbon footprint, how do you responsibly dispose of that? But I think through the ESG, which is environmental, social and governance lens, where a lot of corporates and global organizations are aligned to, and what we're seeing universities doing, and a lot of stakeholders just across being much more aware of it, I think that pressure that they put onto organizations just moves that agenda a little bit much more forward. So for me, the future of energy is for people to realize that energy is a very big thing. That is one of our biggest risks that we have to look after, just like water. And we have to take care and we have to do it responsibly. But it is going to take a whole lot of stakeholders, not just corporate, not just communities, to come together and find innovative solutions, to find the solution, change behavior at the same time, and think out of the box is the other thing. But also to realize a lot of that comes with a lot of opportunity, because where there's a challenge, there's always an opportunity. And it's how you create that to bring, I'm going to say, stakeholders and communities forward as well. Wouldn't it be cool if we could provide access to energy for 600 million Africans in the African continent? And not only there, sorry, I'm going to extend it because it's so important. Become the leader in green energy and become sustainable for this continent, because I think it's long overdue. I think we've got the right location, we've got the right caliber of people, we've got the right challenge that we have to be able to turn it around and really become leaders in this space.